If DNA proves we all come from one African woman, isn't she the creator? Every single person alive today carries a piece of DNA that only comes from their mother and from her mother before her. It's called mitochondrial DNA, and it travels down the maternal line, untouched by male biology. When scientists followed it back through time, they reached a single woman who lived in Africa around 150,000 years ago. They call her mitochondrial Eve, after the first woman. But Eve was invented by the Yahwists hundreds of thousands of years after the original lived. She wasn't even the first woman. She's the only one whose maternal line never broke, which makes her even more incredible. Her line survived ice ages and extinctions, migrations and massacres, enslavement and empire. It lived through fire and flood, through conquest and colonialization, through every kind of silence and every kind of scream. Her daughters endured warlords and crusades, witch trials and stonings, honour killings, forced marriages, ritual cuttings, forced births, and centuries of enduring false narratives conceived, written, and preached by men. But most of all, they faced the agony of childbirth. Without medicine, without midwives, without mercy, hemorrhaging alone in huts, stables, and battlefields, risking death every time they brought life into the world. And still they kept going. They kept giving birth. They kept singing lullabies in languages lost to time. They kept love alive. That is the line we carry. Regardless of our religion, politics, or nationality, she is the one thing we all share. She is the common ancestor of every human being on earth. She was not a queen. She didn't wear a crown. She didn't need one. She lived, she birthed, her daughters birthed, and eventually, here we are. The irony is brutal. Science finally caught up to what the oldest stories once knew, that the world began with a woman. Not a man plucking ribs from his chest, not a virgin in a cave visited by a dove, not a father of the nations passing down divine seed to obedient sons. No, a woman, a mother, a body that bled. And yet, here we are in a world where the Creator is almost always male, where God is a he, where creation is spoken into existence, not born, where women are second, silent, sinful, or simply not there. But it wasn't always this way. Long before monotheism, long before laws were carved into stone, creation was female. In ancient Sumer, it was Namu, the primordial sea goddess who birthed the heavens and earth from her waters. In Egypt, Neith, the great weaver, spun the universe into being long before Atum or Ra took her place. Among the Yoruba of West Africa, Mawu, a wise and compassionate goddess, created humanity alongside her twin. But it was her breath that gave life. In Maori cosmology, it is Papatuanuku, Earth Mother, who lies beneath us still, giving birth to gods, forests, winds, and seas. In Iroquois belief, Sky Woman fell from the heavens and landed on the back of a great turtle, bringing seeds and song. These stories didn't make women sacred because they were good. They made them sacred because they were powerful. They birthed, they commanded, they created. So what happened? What happened is this. The Creator was rewritten as a conqueror, and the conqueror only arrived recently. The patriarchy as a dominant global system has existed for less than 4% of human history. For most of our time on this planet, power flowed through mothers, clans, and the cycle of nature. Women were leaders, life-givers, and lawmakers. The shift to male dominance was not natural. It was violent, and it was new. And the mother of all living things was slowly replaced by gods of sky and fire, law and vengeance. And with that, something even darker took root. The beginning of rape culture. Rape culture begins in stories, in law, in power structures that sanctify the violation of women by naming it divine. The crimes of the gods are not abstract. Zeus was a serial rapist, deceiver, tyrant, dressed as a patriarch. He did not seduce, he did not court, he took, and mythology calls it love. He raped Europa, appearing to her as a beautiful white bull. She climbed onto his back and he carried her away across the sea. She was never seen again. Her name is now a continent, but she was once a girl. He raped Leda as a swan, descending from the heavens and overpowering her. But in earlier versions of the myth, Leda was not the victim. It was Nemesis, the protector of natural law, who first fled Zeus. She transformed into a goose to escape him, and Zeus became a swan in pursuit. He raped her in that form. The egg she laid was passed to Leda, who incubated it. From it hatched Helen, the so-called most beautiful woman in the world, blamed for starting the Trojan War. This version matters because Nemesis wasn't just any goddess, she was balance. She punished hubris, ensuring excessive power or arrogance was countered by retribution. She restored cosmic order. Zeus didn't just violate a woman, he violated the principle of accountability itself. And from that violation came Helen, the woman cursed with being desired, who would one day be stolen, fought over, and shamed for a war men waged in her name. When the goddess of justice is raped by the king of gods, the message is clear. Even retribution must submit. Zeus raped Danae in the form of golden rain, slipping through the cracks of her locked prison and impregnating her with Perseus. She'd been sealed in a chamber by her own father. No man could reach her. But the gods don't need doors. He raped Callisto, a follower of Artemis, who had vowed to remain chaste. Disguised as Artemis herself, Zeus approached her, raped her, and left her pregnant and ruined. She was turned into a bear, then a constellation. Her story, like so many others, turned into stars so we could forget it was ever real. He raped Alcmene, disguising himself as her husband Amphitryon. He crept into her bed, raped her, and from that night came Heracles. Even the heroes are born from deception. Zeus's power was not just political, it was sexual, violent, absolute. He transformed, tricked, impersonated, and overpowered. And every time the story is spun, the woman is silent, or deserving, or punished. Metis, the goddess of wisdom, was not raped. She was devoured, swallowed whole while pregnant with Athena. Why? Because a prophecy foretold that her child would overthrow Zeus. So he consumed her. Athena was born from his head instead, motherless, stripped of her feminine origin, made safe under the control of a man. This is how myth becomes a weapon, when rape is called romance, when theft is called birth, and when power justifies everything. Zeus didn't just conquer the Titans, he overpowered the goddesses, one by one. And his legacy isn't just myth, it's written into the bones of Western culture. Poseidon, god of the sea, raped Medusa in Athena's temple. Instead of punishing him, Athena cursed Medusa, transforming her into a monster with snakes for hair, a gaze that turned men to stone. Medusa becomes the villain. The raped becomes the cursed. The story is twisted into a warning against female rage, female desire, female revenge. Apollo, god of prophecy, pursued the nymph Daphne. When she fled and begged for escape, she was transformed into a tree. Apollo made a crown from her leaves and wore her on his head. This is conquest dressed as romance. The Roman gods followed the Greek example and doubled down. Mars was born of Juno, without a father, but he became the god of war. Venus, once sensual goddess of creation and spring, was reduced to sexual ornamentation. Her power as a life-giver was narrowed to lust. Her temples became brothels in all but name. And still earlier, the goddesses they replaced were more than myth, they were earth itself. Rhea, mother of gods, was tricked and betrayed. Gaia, the earth, bore Uranus and Cronus, who feared her power and tried to contain it. Every generation of male gods tried to stop birth, control it, redirect it, eat it. The gods were war and conquest. The goddess was love and creation. Nerthus, the German earth goddess, sacred and unseeable, travelled each spring in a covered wagon drawn by cows. When she passed through villages, all weapons were forbidden. Men laid down their arms in her presence. The land was sacred. The feminine was peace. But she was forgotten because she wasn't useful to empire. Even in Babylon, where Inanna, one of the 7 deities of heaven, ruled with unapologetic ferocity, her myth was gradually rewritten. The goddess who once chose her lovers and killed those who failed her became a cautionary figure, dangerous, excessive, unstable. Her love was rebranded as punishment, her desire a threat. Her sacred rituals were absorbed into state cults. Her priestesses, once oracles, midwives, sexual initiators, became prostitutes in the public imagination. By the time her stories reached Greek and Roman ears, she was no longer a sovereign, she was a seductress. Her power was now eroticized, commodified, and feared, while men's animal instincts had free rein. In India, the Rig Veda contains humans that once honoured goddesses like Ushas and Aditi. Ushas, the dawn goddess, is one of the oldest in Vedic tradition. She brings light, awakens beings, sets all life in motion. But even in these early texts, cracks form. One tale describes the created god, Prajapati, lusting after his own daughter. She flees, he chases. She becomes a doe, he becomes a stag, he catches her. The gods, disturbed, are not horrified by the act. They debate it, and ultimately they allow it, because from that violence comes creation. Rape becomes a founding act, and the gods bless it. Even in the Bible, the stories are soaked in violence against women. Dinah, the seventh born of Jacob, is taken by Shechem, a Canaanite prince. The text says he took her and lay with her by force, though later versions describe him as loving her, speaking tenderly to her, and wanting to marry her. Some feminist scholars suggest that Dinah loved Shechem, and that the violence came not from the act itself, but from how it was perceived by her family. What matters is that Dinah was never given a voice. We don't know her version of events. We only hear from the men. Her brothers, Simeon and Levi, were outraged, not at the harm done to their sister, but at the insult to their honour. Shechem's father, Hamor, offers marriage as a reparation, and Jacob agrees on one condition, that every man in Shechem's city be circumcised. There is no mention of accepting Jacob's God in this condition, only that they be physically marked in a way that signals submission, compliance, or shared identity. Hamor agrees, and so do the men of the city, believing it will bring them kinship. But on the third day, while they're still in pain from the primitive surgery, Simeon and Levi enter the city with swords. They slaughter every man, not just Shechem, all of them. They loot the city, take the women, and bring Dinah home. She's carried like an object reclaimed, a body passed from one man to another, a symbol of vengeance, not a person with desire or grief or will. We never hear her thoughts. Tamar, daughter of King David, is raped by her half-brother Amnon. When she begs him not to violate her, he overpowers her, and once he's done, he hates her. David, their father, does nothing. Tamar tears her robes and disappears into silence. Once again, the woman is both violated and erased. These aren't warnings, these are blueprints, and they're everywhere. In Deuteronomy 22, the law is clear. If a man rapes a virgin, he must pay her father 50 shekels of silver and marry her. Not punished, married. Her body is a transaction. Her trauma is irrelevant. The concern is ownership, her value to a man. And it gets worse. The law does not acknowledge her consent or lack of it. If the act occurs in a field, if she screamed and no one heard it, it's assumed she could not be helped. And if she didn't scream, it's assumed she consented. Either way, her voice is irrelevant. There is no trial, no hearing, only her father's compensation. This is the script of rape culture codified into sacred law. It removes agency from the woman entirely. It erases pain in the favour of restitution. And it turns rape into something negotiable, as long as it doesn't inconvenience the men in charge. This is an ancient history. These are the roots of modern law. For centuries in Europe, rape was classified as a property crime, not against the woman, but against the father or husband. Her value was measured by her chastity, her dowry, her use to men. As late as the 19th century in England, a marital rape wasn't recognised as a crime because the wife's body was legally her husband's, because the law said she has already consented, permanently. It wasn't until 1991 that the UK House of Lords formally criminalised rape within marriage. In France, a husband had the legal right to kill his wife if he caught her in the act of adultery. That law remained until 1975, and of course, the same right was never extended to women. In the United States, it wasn't until 1993 that marital rape became a crime in all 50 states. That's not ancient history, that's yesterday. In Germany, marital rape was only criminalised in 1997, and even then the lawmakers in Bundestag argued it would criminalise marriage. The vote barely passed. And let's not forget the witches. In Scotland, the last woman executed as a witch was in 1727, but the Witchcraft Act remained in the books until 1951 in the UK. That's the legal inheritance, that's the blueprint, that's what we're still clawing our way out of. Think of the girl bride in Yemen, 8 years old, torn apart on her wedding night. Think of Qandil Balok, murdered in Pakistan for being too visible. The social media star took selfies like a sword. She danced, she dared, she called herself a feminist in a country that made that word dangerous, and they killed her for it. Her brother strangled her in her sleep and called it honour. Too visible, too vocal, too much. Think of Mahsa Amini, beaten to death by Iran's morality police for the way she wore her hair. Think of the American girls raped by college athletes who walk free. Think of the Christian girls in purity rings told their worth lay between their legs. The Orthodox Jewish women denied the right to divorce without a man's permission. The Catholic nuns silenced by bishops for exposing abuse. This is not one religion. This is not one culture. It's the same book, different robes. Control her body, silence her mouth, call it honour, call it holiness, call it tradition. It's still violence. Every system that claims female pain is less than male power is built on the same lie. The woman is not the origin, she is not the divine. But she was, and she is. Mitochondrial Eve is not just a fact, she's a reckoning. She's the unbroken line, the original source, the proof that before they created laws or scriptures or borders, there was a woman, and she made us. And if her name has been forgotten, her body is not. It is in us, in our breath, in the long maternal chain that carried us here. And that chain offers the way out of what seems like an impossible world. Women's rights are being decimated, women and children are being bombed, and misogynists, rapists, and tyrants rule. The patriarchy needs to be dismantled, in the same way it started. It's time for us to tell our story again. So, from the top, in the beginning, there was a woman, and everything else was born from her.